Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Very excited about tonight's show. We have an unbelievable guest, and in my usual fashion, I called the guests on the same day and hoped that they're free that night. And lo and behold, this guest was free. And she is a serial killer expert, a forensic psychologist, and I'm going to introduce her more later, but I just wanted to get you guys all excited to know that we have a special guest coming on tonight. A lot of new happenings, of course, in the Gilgo Beach case. Evidence that came forth that is stronger than the evidence we even thought they had in July when Rex Heuermann was first arrested. And turns out that the 4 or 5 pieces of mitochondrial DNA are not just mitochondrial DNA that made this identification, but now they were able to use different techniques called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphism, to identify the DNA by way of nuclear DNA, which has 97% more genetic material in it. So I'm not going to pretend I'm a DNA expert. I am not, and I think I explained that pretty well for a layman, but that's under that umbrella. That's what the show is going to be about tonight. And we're going to connect some of the other dots with what Dr. Joni Johnston's expertise is. And that is, of course, forensic psychology and the personalities of these individuals. And Dr. Joni Johnston, she has her own little podcast, and it's called Unmasking a Murderer. And that is what she does for a living. And Dr. Joni is ready to tell us about some of the personality traits of Rex Heuermann that makes him fit into this role of that he's being charged with, being a serial killer. So, folks, hang on to your seats. Get ready for true crime from a police perspective, the off-the-cuff perspective, the police off-the-cuff perspective. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch Microbizer.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. We're back. And not only do I have Dr. Joni Johnston, but I have 2 of my frequent flyers. And straight out of Brooklyn, retired NYPD Detective Phil Grimaldi. Phil, welcome to the show tonight.
Thanks for having me, Billy. And I'm really looking forward because this is a great guest tonight.
Absolutely. And with us also, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, law degree, and part-time priest. Here's confessions after the show. He doesn't like when I say that, but we're just kidding, of course. Welcome, Professor Mike Geary, to the show.
Billy, good evening. Good evening, Phil. How are you?
How are you, Father Mike?
Mike, it even looks like you're in a courtroom with the wall behind you there, you know?
That's
Right,
true.
a
That's
courtroom. Remember, a courtroom.
That's right. This is your courtroom. And the guest of honor this evening showed up with no notice, basically, at all. Dr. Joni Johnston. Dr. Johnston, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize I was going to be surrounded by all these law enforcement professionals. I'm surrounded by on all sides.
Does it make you feel safe?
It does.
Oh, that's good. Dr. Johnston, we're going to get right into it because I know you don't have all night to stay with us. Now, we know I in the monologue, the opening monologue, I spoke about some of the new evidence they had. But what many of the people that are listening tonight really care about is the personality traits, the MO, the signature, the organized, the disorganized offender tab that we can put on certain serial killers. And off the air, you even said Rex Heuermann checks lots of these boxes. You want to speak upon that?
Yeah, he really does because sexually sadistic serial killers, which I think that Rex Heuermann definitely is, if he's guilty. Of course, he has not been convicted of anything at this point. Um, they're relatively rare. And so we have to look not only at personality, but also look at some of the crime scene behaviors, because as you can imagine, when I go in and evaluate somebody who maybe has a paraphilia, which is what we call, a deviant sexual interest, which sexual sadism is considered that because it causes either emotional distress in the person who has it, which is not the case with sexual sadism, or which is it causes problems with other people, which is really the only reason we ever see anybody who has sexual sadism as a forensic psychologist is they've gotten in some kind of trouble. So, it's not very common for them to start telling about all their sexual fantasies, even to a psychologist, because people with this disorder understand that this is not normal, right? People don't like hearing about these things. They're disturbed by them. They think it's gross, it's icky, it's aberrant or whatever. So a lot of times in terms of diagnosing sexual sadism, particularly in a criminal context, we have to look at some of the crime scene behaviors, such as evidence of torture, such as evidence of binding, such as evidence of unnecessary mutilation, such as evidence of unnecessary control. Oftentimes we'll see insertion of objects into the victim. There's some very specific behaviors that we tend to see at the crime scene. And what that means is it's kind of showing us, and of course, Rex Heuermann shows us in so many different ways, as you alluded to, like a lot of his internet searches. It tells us what the basis for those behaviors are all the fantasies that kind of come before them. And he clearly is somebody who, for whatever reason, there's lots of theories about this, sex and violence are fused with him. And that is the worst case scenario for a victim. Because if I'm a serial killer and I am killing you for money, right? I want an insurance policy. The killing itself is a means to an end. So I might do that quickly. If I'm getting sexually aroused by your terror and your pain, that really is the goal in and of itself. And that's the reason we often see these horrific crime scenes. And we'll sometimes see these murders that go on for hours because that is the sexual turn on for an offender like this.
Dr. Joni, we asked you a question off the air, and I have a certain feeling about this, and you also had your own feelings, and other people have their own feelings. And the question was, do you think that Rex Heuermann killed these women in his house?
And my answer, I do. And my reason for thinking that is a couple of different reasons. Number one, he is so driven by all these fantasies of what he wants to do. I think he is so motivated by this need for domination and power and control. And you look at him and you look at his life. He's an architect. He's organized. This is somebody I think who would want to be in a safe place, a place where he is going to be able to take his time and be in complete control and do whatever he wants to this poor victim as long as he wants to. So it's hard for me to imagine him driving somebody out to a deserted park or those kinds of things, or in the backseat of his car and committing these murders.
Dr. Joni, I felt the opposite. I felt that he would have killed them at a different location, just to sort of, and I could be right or I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong, but I would think the most likely place he would have killed them would be in his car. And he had this big Chevy Escalade that became a big joke, really, because they had this 12 years ago. And this evidence was part of the evidence, that green Escalade there, that enabled Rex Heuermann to get identified. And something as simple as what law enforcement do called a lawman search, which is a computer search of specific criteria on a vehicle. And that gave them, 2 months after they formed the Gilgo Beach Task Force, that gave them the name of Rex Heuermann. And that gave them the address in Massapequa Park. And that is basically was the catalyst to arresting Rex Heuermann. I don't want to be the only one to talk, guys. If you have questions of Dr. Joni.
I got to piggyback that. I agree with you, Doc. I think the murders took place inside the home, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Number one, the profile of a serial killer. We talked about it before. Control. He wants a total control over the victim, and I think that we're not talking about someone grabbed off the street here that's terribly in fear. These are sex workers that probably dealt with maybe trying to get ripped off, a person that didn't want to pay. So I think that even more tells me that it probably happened in a location that he could control. I'm seeing it as maybe down the basement of the house, a secluded area, something that if there was screams wouldn't be heard so easily. I don't think in the backseat of a car or in a public location, even if it's a desolated location, is going to be something that he would risk where his victim could get away. That's what I'm seeing as far as everything that I've been told about this case.
Professor Mike.
Yeah, I gotta agree with Dr. Joni and Phil. He's a control freak, and I think he doesn't want to be in a 1 hour no tell motel with thin walls and people walking down the hall outside. Management being able to pick up the phone, call the police. There's a disturbance going on in room 12. He is. I think he probably did this stuff acting as a husband who's just cheating on his wife, maybe make those girls feel a little bit more comfortable that this is just an ordinary guy, just doing a little crazy stuff on the side. I think he probably took them down the basement and in some sort of vault or some sort of room that was insulated. I think Phil's right. Yeah, this way the screams can't be heard or anything like that. His family was out of town. I know at least on one occasion, or maybe all occasions, they were out of town, and therefore he had a lot of time, a lot of freedom, and he knew that he was alone and he was in total control. I think it's all about for him just the control.
Yet Dr. Joni, we hear about control, we hear about power, but when you look at Rex Heuermann's personality, he wasn't a very brave guy. I mean, he was scared away by the pimp of Amber Costello and threatened and took off like a scared rabbit, and then realized he got ripped off and called her back and then took her the next night and apparently murdered her the next night. So he wasn't this, is that common for a serial killer that inside they're little scared boys?
100%. I mean, certainly when we're talking about these kinds of serial killers, because think about it. I mean, there's no level playing field here, right? There's no attempt for there to be some kind of matching of wills or some kind of, let me see if I can find somebody who's my equal to see if I can conquer them. No, serial killers who are interested in power and domination and control, and many of them are, they're setting things up where the odds are stacked in their favor from the very beginning. And so, if there's an actual contest, like, another guy comes at them or the Amber Costello's pimp comes after him or whatever, yeah, they're going to run away or whatever. But in a situation where you have somebody who's you've talked this person into coming with you, you're getting them in a location, you know what you're going to do, you're bringing rope or whatever your tools are or whatever, what kind of odds does this person have? You can trick them. So I think most, sexually motivated serial killers, they're cowards. They're not looking for somebody who's going to challenge them in any way. They're looking for somebody they can easily capture and dominate and manipulate.
Doc, does he have a?
It's funny in criminals too, and most of us worked in robbery before we went up into the more serious crimes, and that was the MO of a robber. A robber wanted to rip off someone that was either drunk or weak or an old lady or helpless in some way. And it goes for perhaps a criminal personality that is not just a serial killer, but probably other crimes also.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doc. I mean, you're the expert on the serial killers. He had a plan in place. Now, the plan got upset by the boyfriend, the pimp, whatever you want to call him, of Amber Costello. So he decided, you know what, this is not working out. I'm going to save it for another day. He pulled out. He left. He did contact her. He made contact. He talked about maybe getting his money back, and then I believe that he must have talked her out of taking her cell phone and her purse, because when she left the next day, she left those things behind. So he must have said, listen, I don't like what you pulled yesterday. You want to hang out with me? I'm going to pay you. Leave your bag home, obviously the cell phone along with it. And that's what we believe happened. But it sounds like he had a plan and the plan didn't work out. That's why he pulled back to me.
I think that's so interesting in a couple of different ways. One is that he obviously has some skill at talking people into things, because this is somebody who basically set him up in some respects, right? To not have to go with him and to still get his money. And yet he was able to talk her into going with him the next day and leaving stuff behind,
Yes.
which I think is really interesting.
Well,
And the
Dr.
other thing I'll
Joni,
just
he said that he would give her $1,500, which was probably, 10 times what she usually got. And that was probably what motivated her to go with him.
that may be true. I don't know that, but if that's true. But what I'm saying is, if you're in a business where you have to really watch your back, and I think we would all agree that's one you'd have to have your spidey senses up at all times. And you have been in a situation where your customer is ripped off and now contacting you and they're angry about it.
Oh, yeah.
I would still argue that it takes some smooth talking and some skill, no matter how much money you're offering, to talk this person who's you've seen now and he's huge, 6'4" or whatever, a big man, into meeting you again. I think that, another piece of evidence I think to support that is in one of the text messages that came out in this most recent release of documents. And he's talking about he exchanged some text messages with one of the sex workers. And right away, he mentions that he's married. Right away. And I thought that's so interesting, because what is he saying, right? I'm a safe person. I'm married, right? I have a wife. This is just going to be exchanged between the two of us. So he's right away reassuring her that I'm a normal guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very normal. Dr. Joni, from the chat, Nancy H., Dr. Joni, what about committing these crimes in his daughter's bedroom, which feeds his sick fantasies and explains his daughter's hair being on a victim?
I mean, I think, Nancy, that is a great question. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. It's hard for me to think, just because I think as a mom, I don't want to think this, that anybody would choose to, commit this kind of any kind of murder, but this kind of murder in particular in their daughter's bedroom. But we know there have been other serial killers. I know that Carrie Rawson, whose father is Dennis Rader, has talked about her father using blankets. Using blankets with her that came from a crime scene. So it's not hard to believe that, things such as what, Nancy, you're talking about are possible.
Part of the things that there's not even probably a tenth of the evidence has been reported yet.
Oh, no.
You got to remember, they did at least 4 search warrants. His house, he had a storage facility, his office, his vehicle. Potentially he had another place in South Carolina. So probably even search warrants that we don't know about.
They were in the house for about a week or so, Billy, right?
Yeah.
8 to 10 days.
So my point with that is, what are the chances that they recovered trophies, souvenirs, and potentially forensic evidence, even though it could have been 12 or 13 years old, that connected any of these victims to Rex Heuermann's home?
Yeah, I would be surprised if they don't find things. And they were missing clothes. I mean, there was all kinds of things they did that we don't know that they've recovered with some of the victims. I think you could almost look to some extent at some of the burner phones as trophies as well. And that he used these phones and he still had some of them. And some of them he used years ago. So, I mean, I know that there's a sense that he's kind of a pack rat, somebody who doesn't throw anything away. And that may be the case as well. But I think he would also have some kind of psychological significance to him, even ones he was no longer using.
Well, Dr. Joni, this also came out, and this was released during the tenure of the last police commissioner, Geraldine Hart, who was a female police commissioner, former FBI, a law degree. And they had that for years, and they held it, and they never tried to get it shown to the public. Perhaps someone would recognize it. And, that was a lot of the criticisms in this case. But that was wrapped around the body of Maureen Brainerd Barnes with hairs or either Asa Ellerup, who was Rex Heuermann's wife, or his daughter, or both, Victoria Heuermann. So such powerful evidence. And when you see that belt with, I believe the initials were MH, or the belt is sort of weird looking.
WH, isn't it?
Yeah, WH, William Heuermann, and just really coming out about. We knew about the belt for a couple of years, but it just came out that there was hair on it that identified with Asa Ellerup or his daughter Victoria Heuermann. So amazing that the evidence was so well preserved, so well collected, and that now it's the subject of nuclear DNA, which is very tough for this defense attorney to fight that.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching some of the press conferences, as all of you might have been as well, and just, the number of zeros after some of these numbers in terms of the odds of it being somebody else. I mean, you can even get your head around those numbers. It's like, I don't know how many total population on Earth, how many Earths you'd have to even approach the odds that they were throwing out in terms of the odds of it being somebody else. I would not want to be Rex Heuermann's defense attorney. Let me just put it that way.
No, and I don't even think in regards to discovery that he even has a tenth of the discovery yet, because I think his head would be spinning. He'll need about 4 or 5 assistants to go through all of the evidence that they have in this case.
Mhm.
I want to quickly get to, because I know you're not going to be here for that long. Let's talk about, his organized status, his disorganized status, his signature, his MO, all of those things as it relates to a serial killer. And I don't want to move too fast, because I know our audience, even though people in the true crime community, they probably know this stuff better than we do.
Yeah.
And,
And I'm always
I'm saying
amazed
I'm
at
moving too fast.
the
I'm probably not
questions.
moving-
The questions are amazing. Sometimes
Right. I'm probably not moving fast enough for them, So if we could, and Mike, why don't you ask Dr. Will on that vein, organized versus disorganized, that type of thing.
Yeah, Doc. Yeah, I had made a comment a while back, a couple months ago. We had done a show originally on Rex Heuermann. We talked about, I think, with Bobby Chacon, and we were talking about, a disorganized killer versus an organized killer. And a disorganized killer would leave a lot of clues. They're interested in escaping. They're leaving things. They're not making sure about their DNA, fingerprints. Cell phone technology. They're not up on it, and they're maybe easier to catch than an organized person who seems to have their ducks lined up in a row, like Heuermann. But when I look at some of the things he did, using burlap from his home to wrap the bodies, using a belt that probably belonged to his father, I see some like idiotic, disorganized elements. How would you classify him overall? As somewhat on the disorganized spectrum and not completely on the organized spectrum? Like, where do you fall, like, in the spectrum of organized to disorganized when it comes to Heuermann?
That's such a great question, because when I was doing research for my book, I did that. One of the first things I looked at was this organized versus disorganized classification. And, the recent research suggests that really it is not quite as useful as it used to be. And it's for that very reason that you're saying, is that, yes, you have a continuum, and you have some serial killers who fall more toward the organized, some fall more toward the disorganized, but you almost always find elements of disorganization in organized offenders, and you almost always find some level of organization in disorganized offenders, or they wouldn't be able to kill somebody. So I definitely would put Rex Heuermann toward the more organized end of things. But you're absolutely right. He made some complete errors in judgment. He did some stupid things. On the one hand, he uses a belt that has potentially his grandfather's initials on there, and yet he's going to all these links to research all this stuff about, deleting stuff from your computer, and, in the burner phones, and for this person and that person. So I definitely think he's an organized offender if we have to put him in one category or the other,
Right.
but he definitely has some disorganized elements.
Dr. Joni, if you had to predict, and I know that no one knows right now because of the length of time the bodies were out in the elements. If you had to predict how he killed them, what would you say the method was?
If I had to bet on it, I would say I would put all of my money on strangulation.
I would too. I was
Me
going to
too.
say the exact same thing, asphyxia, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is also to me this huge 6'6" 280, 300-pound man, sort of like a cowardly way of a man overpowering these little women, that
Mostly petite.
yeah, little petite
Yes.
women. Here's someone from the chat also. There was an interview where Rex Heuermann was interviewed at his workplace. In fact, I think he was wearing I think I have a picture of him in his dopey looking suit. Yeah, there he is. And in that interview, he said he was interviewed by an architectural business. He spoke on how sometimes he had to crack the whip on his employees. Wow.
He described himself as a problem solver. They call me when there's a problem. And, I'm seeing, though, a component of organization with his business and with his killing somewhat. But it seems like his home life was very disorganized.
Yeah.
Hence the house that is, described as a shithole, so to speak. But, with all of those things said, I think maybe they weren't intentional, obviously. They could have been mistakes. I always say that anytime someone starts to think about committing a murder, they're already making the mistakes that are going to get them caught. So maybe in the haste of, killing Amber Costello, I think it was the belt was found on. He just grabbed the first thing, and the burlap. Yeah, that was a big mistake, obviously, because the hairs were able to be embedded into the burlap for an extended period of time. That those victims were out in the elements for about 18 months in some cases or longer, and that hair remained. Whereas if it was a plastic bag and there was a hair, obviously rain, snow, wind would have blown it off and it may not have been found. So I think those definitely signs of mistakes, but I think they might have just been mistakes as opposed to disorganization. That's my opinion.
Well, and you're absolutely right, because Maureen Rayner Barnes was in 2007, they believe. And so she would have been an earlier victim of his. And so it's possible that he, did grab the belt or whatever. And then when he was doing it again, he learned from that, right? So he decided to use something different. Now, it was another mistake, but it wasn't the belt, which I think also kind of brings us to something you mentioned earlier, which was this kind of MO versus signature kind of thing. Because it's interesting when you look at him, using belts with Maureen Rayner Barnes and then changing and using ropes or other things down the road. There's a change a little bit in MO in terms of at least in terms of what he's using, but the signature of binding is the same.
Dr. Joni, would you just define modus operandi versus signature? Just because it's confusing a little bit for people.
Yeah, well, the signature part of it is easy for me as a psychologist, because that's really something that the victim does, or the perpetrator does routinely. It isn't necessary for the crime to occur, at least from a physical standpoint. So, it's not, I'm shooting you with a gun because I've got to get rid of you. That's my way of, that's like my MO. This is how I'm committing the crime. I'm physically committing the crime. A signature is more like something that I need to do psychologically that's going to make me feel good. It gives me gratification. An example of a signature might be, I always take a person's jewelry with me, or I take a picture of the person or a piece of their clothes. That isn't necessary as part of a crime, but it might be necessary psychologically. Whereas an
So
MO
it makes that person feel better that they've done something that gives them their jollies or whatever.
Exactly. It's kind of a psychological necessity, that they have for whatever reason. It can sometimes be a ritual that they do. I always do it in this particular way. Well, you could kill somebody in a lot of other ways, but I have to kind of do the A, B, C, and D. So it's something that the person does. It has some symbolism, some symbolic meaning to them, and it provides them some kind of gratification. But it's not necessary to commit the crime. Whereas the MO is the actual, what do they do in committing the crime?
Dr. Joni, I just want to ask another thing. Asa Ellerup, his wife. I don't think she was a participant. I don't, but I think that I would find it very difficult to believe that she had no inkling that he was involved in nefarious activity. I mean, I think she's probably mentally ill also, the
Uh-huh.
wife. Just the fact that she was married to this guy for 27 years, I believe she would have to be mentally ill. The condition of that house, I believe she would have to be mentally ill.
Mhm.
Looking at her when they first arrested him, she appears to be mentally ill.
She could be a victim of his violence too, domestic violence too. I mean, under his control.
I believe that, but just want to ask Dr. Joni, do you think she knew about his nefarious activities or was involved?
I do not think that she was involved in his activities. I would be very surprised. Now, we know that serial killers about 25% of the time commit their crimes with somebody else. So it's not, super rare for that to happen. I don't see that happening here. And, if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to say I was blindsided by that. I just don't see that.
And if you're wrong, we're going to pull you back on the show to make you
And yell at me. Yeah, yeah,
Admit it,
explain
admit it.
myself. And the other thing I would say is, the whole issue of, did she know? My question is, did she know what? Did she have suspicions that her husband maybe was seeing sex workers? Possibly. I know there were certain parts of the house she wasn't supposed to go into. So clearly, I think she must have had some indication that something was not right, or he was secretive about some things. That's a long way to go from my husband is secretive, or he's keeping weapons in the basement. I don't want to see them, or whatever, or he's acting strange or whatever, to my husband is a, sexually motivated serial killer who's picking up sex workers and torturing them to death.
But she passively allowed his behavior. And maybe, she was abused to the point where she was beaten down that she couldn't object to his behavior.
Well, we don't know. I mean, we don't know what kind of conversations they had. We don't know at some point, did she say to him, are you seeing sex workers? Or are you having an affair? We don't know what went on in their home and what kind of conversations they had.
100%. Dr. Joni, can I give each Mike and Detective Phil a question? I know you have to go. I hate to let you go, but I gave you my word. Mike, you want to ask her one last question before she has to go?
Just about the trophies. Do you think, because I know we talked about it being organized and towards and disorganized. Do you think he would take something like a driver's license or photo ID or something like that, just so that he could stare at that picture? Or do you think he'd be more like somebody who just might take like a ring or a piece of jewelry? Do you think he would want to see the photo of that person? Something a little bit more official in a weird way?
Gosh, that's such a hard one, because what flashed to me as you were asking that question was him calling, a couple of families,
Right, with
and wanting talking to the sister and that kinds of that. And so I'm thinking, as I'm thinking that through, I'm thinking, okay, if this is somebody who would be that sadistic,
Right.
is he going to want a picture, or would he want more of a, something he could touch and hold or whatever?
Right.
And I have to say, I'm on the fence about that, because both of those are personal in different ways, right? Being able to see that person obviously is something that's very, very personal. And then, although he may have images on the computer, I don't know if he had images of them on the computer. If that's the case, I would think he would take something more personal, maybe underwear, or a piece of jewelry, or clothing that he could touch, and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Very good. Phil, last question for Dr. Joni.
Last question, Doc. We talked about on yesterday's show that we believe that he's going to enjoy the trial. He'll enjoy, different aspects of maybe the crime scene, talking about it. Family members may talk about the victims. We also talked about, if he is convicted, perhaps there's a chance down the line that he may cooperate and give information on other victims or how he killed the victims. Do you see that as possibly being something that could be down the line? So he would again be able to talk about it with investigators. I'm talking about if he's convicted down the line after conviction.
So I definitely would agree with the panel last night, or with all of you, in terms of, I think he might enjoy the trial, certain aspects of it. Particularly, I think, which is just horrifying to say, that I think I can see him particularly enjoying victim impact statements. Because there's another element of sadism there, right? If you get to hear how upset family members are, and how, that's horrible to even think about, but that pops in my head, and I think that would kind of be true. Down the road, it's interesting. He doesn't strike me as somebody who would want to talk about that just to talk about it or to get attention in that way. He wasn't taunting he wasn't taunting the police. He wasn't, trying to get attention for what he was doing all this period of time. He was under the radar. I can see him talking about that only if he has something to gain.
Dr. Joni, I want to keep my word to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I want you to promise to come back. We love having you on the show.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
Oh, I'd love to. And listen, thanks for thinking about me. It was so much fun being with all of you as always.
have a great night, Dr. Joni.
Thank you, Doc.
you.
Good seeing you.
Good night now.
Bye.
What an amazing guest.
Great guest.
Sorry she had to leave, but I agreed that she said, I can only stay a half hour. We kidnapped her for 5 extra minutes. So that was great. I just want to do a quick police off the cuff commercial. Folks, if you like true crime, real crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. Police off the cuff. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, share us with your friends, your family. And if you want to contribute to us in a financial way, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels. And we appreciate all the support that we get from our friends, our fans, and our subscribers. Now we're going to move on without Dr. Joni, but that expertise is invaluable. That's, I think, what a lot of people in the true crime community, they want to hear the experts talk about the behavioral analysis of someone like a Rex Heuermann. And with all the evidence that's already been presented, that aspect of his behavior hasn't even really been discussed. Imagine a Dr. Joni sitting on the stand in Rex Heuermann's trial and describing how his behaviors are classical serial killer behaviors, Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, I think it would be enlightening for the jury. I think it would be stomach churning for the family and the people who are witnessing the trial. But I think it would be something that would be necessary in order to understand the context, with the why. Remember, we always talk about that: who, what, where, when, how, but the why part of it. And it would be tremendous revelation, because this is something that you don't get out of a textbook. You need somebody like Dr. Johnston getting on the stand to discuss in great detail the why, the context of it. Why would it happen? Where would it happen? When it would happen? What would drive this sort of thing? That is invaluable, I think, to a prosecutor.
That's why I think some of the other information coming in, i.e. John Ray and his press conference with that information that was 27 years old from the affiant that swore to it. I have a really hard time believing that. I really do. And I think that someone like Dr. Joni can sort of solidify my opinion on that, and others perhaps. But when it was first disseminated out there to the press and to everyone, people bit into it like it was a fresh piece of beef, hook, line, and sinker. Oh,
they're calling it evidence, new evidence.
Like they were calling it new evidence, exactly.
Yeah.
And we were like, when I first heard it, I was like, this is crap, And as you said, Mike, being an attorney, because you sign an affidavit doesn't mean it's true. It means it's what you are saying. You think it's true, but it may not be true. Phil.
Well, I think that somebody like Dr. Joni is going to be so important in this case, and part of the prosecution is going to be bringing in evidence collection experts, people to talk about DNA, people to talk about the cell phone technology with the burner phones and all the different things with regard to the evidence. Well, now we're going to have someone like Dr. Joni Johnston that is going to be able to talk about the profile of a serial killer and the actions that he took that are consistent with that of a serial killer. It's going to be so important. The jury's going to be plugged in. They're going to be listening to every piece of evidence. They're going to be listening to every witness. Now we're going to have someone like Dr. Joni Johnston that's going to talk about a serial killer. Did you see how quick she spit out names of other serial killers? She's right on top of studying serial killers. She's an expert in the field. And I think someone like her is going to be very, very strong and powerful for the prosecution in this case, just to give the jury an insight into the psychology of this killer, the thought process, the movements, and the reasons that they do the thing. We talked about souvenirs and trophies. She'll be able to explain that and come up with the reasons why that they do those things, that they take those items. So it's going to be invaluable for the prosecution for sure to have an expert like her on the stand.
Margaret Hearn, looking at Asa's action post-arrest, immediately filed divorce. Had Rex Heuermann transfer title house to her. GoFundMe account, constantly sitting out front of house in front of reporters instead of backyard. Peacock deal. Yeah, I mean, look,
good point.
She sort of needs him to make the money from this Peacock deal, but I Dr. Joni, many people think that she was not involved in this. I think that the Suffolk County detectives had a lot more time to ascertain whether she was in fact involved in this. And they said right away that she was not. Did they give it enough time? I think they could have gave it a little more time to see if anything else was dug up after the investigation really hit its peak. But now many people are satisfied that she was not involved. But then many people are so taken in by the fact that her hair was on 3 of the bodies. And to many people, they think that equals that she's involved. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, we talked about this a while ago. We found it troubling. We all found it troubling that she seemed very early on after the arrest was made, originally last summer, when Ray Tierney said, we cleared Asa Elzrup. And we were all like, okay, but there's hairs involved, that sort of thing. It seemed to be, they looked at maybe her travel schedule, going to Iceland, going to outside the state. We got a little bit more information when it came just recently with Maureen Brainerd Barnes. They said that that she they looked at her credit card and they said she was in New Jersey in Atlantic City for like 10 days, like starting a couple of days before Maureen Brainerd Barnes went missing in early July, and that Rex joined them several days later. And apparently he was still in New York several days after police think that he'd killed her, and he was checking Maureen Brainerd Barnes' cell phone to see if there's any messages on it. So I think that I feel better excluding her now as a possible accomplice in all of them, because in this particular one that we just heard of, there seems to be excellent, corroboration with her credit card and, probably hotel records and things like that. And in fact, that he ended up joining her down in Atlantic City with the kids for several days. So, yeah, I was really taken aback in the beginning how quickly they cleared her. But now that I see that they do have this other evidence that clears her, I'm feeling a little bit better about it.
Lieutenant Peter Pranzo, Harlem Raiders fame. Suffolk County Police Department jumped the gun at the beginning, letting her completely off the hook. Lieutenant Pete, you're preaching to the choir. We totally agree with you. We felt that it was a little quick. Let me hear from
the new charges. Well, we had advance notice that it was coming, so I explained that to him. Again, he said, I'm not guilty of these charges. He's looking forward to fight these charges, and we're doing that. We're going to continue to prepare. I expect that additional discovery will be forthcoming on the newest victim, and we're going to examine that and scrutinize it.
Any reaction to the hairs linked to his daughter and his wife?
We saw that this morning, and I know you're going to have a subsequent press conference upstairs. You folks have followed this case from the beginning, and all along we have been told that the evidence is unsuitable for nuclear DNA testing. This morning was.
I was just about to say it's not dragging tonight. There it is. Mike, I'm pretty satisfied that she's not involved. I'm talking about Asa Ellerup.
The first time in
there it is.
13 plus years that miraculously nuclear DNA testing and results have come forward. There has been testimony, there has been lab reports that consistently said it was incapable of having nuclear DNA testing. And we had mitochondrial DNA, and those statistics were quite frankly not very convincing. The initial mitochondrial DNA testing for what they claim was his wife was 28 out of 10,000. There was another hair that was 4 out of 10,000. That doesn't put the wife as a suspect in terms of, or the actual donor of that DNA, but what it simply says is that she is not excluded. But if
There it goes again.
Yeah. But I agree. I think that, yeah, I think she's a browbeaten woman. And I think Rex was a control freak in every aspect of his life. And yeah, I don't see him wanting her to be part of it. He's got that facade of being a respectable man going to Manhattan from Long Island every day, taking the LIRR. And I don't see him risking anything, letting the kids or Elsa or his wife get in on what he was doing. She might have known he was having some dalliances on the side, but I don't think she had any idea more than that.
At this point, I feel like the investigation's gone so far. There's been so many people involved in it, and they're, consistently saying they don't believe she's involved.
Right.
I mean, they have the records that we just pointed out on the last case, on the Maureen Brainerd Barnes case.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think there's other records that exist, periods of times that they think these other women were missing. So I'm satisfied with that. And listen, if news or new evidence or something should come forward, she could be charged in the future, but doesn't appear to be that way at all.
Yeah.
The accused serial killer, Rex Heuermann, be responsible for even more deaths.
I wanted to ask this
Yesterday,
question.
he was charged with a fourth.
We're having problems here. I wanted to ask that question of Dr. Joni. What are the chances that Rex Heuermann committed? He's 60 years old. These cases are 12, 13 years old. He didn't start then. He started much sooner than that. So what are the chances there are more bodies on him? And he may...
I was thinking of that too, Bill.
And Phil, we said, and Dr. Joni potentially, and I mean, she doesn't have to agree with us. We're the popo. We're the police, and we know what's going on. We know what time it is. Anyway, what are the chances that he has more bodies on him? And after he goes to trial, and I believe he will be convicted. He will get convicted. There is a ton of evidence against this guy. And you hear sometimes, and this guy, Michael Brown, his attorney, excellent attorney. I like his demeanor. He reminds me of Gotti's old attorney, Bruce Cutler, a little bit,
Yeah.
Right.
He's a big, imposing guy. He's confident. But, when he starts talking about, there's no witnesses to this. Yes, there is. And you know who the witness is? Science. The victims are the witnesses to this.
Science and
anyone
technology.
that has ever investigated a homicide knows the bodies are the best witnesses, right? And also, you don't have to have eyewitnesses. Now you have DNA, you have science, you have the art and the science of investigation, which I say ad nauseum. And not only do we have the forensic evidence, but we have the digital evidence. The digital evidence, I'm going to use Professor Geary's expression that we should get him a belt that says on the belt, consciousness
Get him a hat.
of
Consciousness of guilt.
Consciousness
Baseball
of
hat.
guilt. We should get him a belt and have it imprinted on it. The
I
guilty mind. The guilty mind, Professor Mike. Talk about it.
Well, Billy, the guilty mind is anything that is done that demonstrates the fact that a person knows that they are guilty of committing a crime. It could be as simple as, police officers approaching someone who fits a general description of a radio run of a past robbery or past burglary. And as the police officer approaches them, the person turns around and runs away, just instantly, just turns around, flips and runs. That's, consciousness of guilt. Why in the world would you suddenly turn around and run away? In this case, it's the buying software. Somewhere in 2020, not too long ago, he was looking to buy some software that would destroy evidence of contacts with some of the women using his laptop and cell phones and laptops and tablets and things like that. Now, this type of software is not illegal to purchase. People have it, probably security firms and things like that. But I would like to know, and I'm taking this a little cue from what Phil said yesterday about putting that, when he talked about that belt, putting that belt in the public's eye for the first time with the initials WH. What was his reaction? Did he start scrambling around looking on different websites? And I think when did he start looking for information to destroy software to destroy information on his tablet and his laptop? Soon as the Gilgo Beach Task Force became active in 2020, or after that belt was image was released to the public. I think that software and the timing of it, I think could go to. I could see a judge allowing that in as evidence of his state of mind, of his guilty mind, of his consciousness of guilt. Absolutely.
Mike, you talk about consciousness of guilt. How does his attorney explain this? Found on his computer, torture-related pornography and child pornography, including Mistress Long Island, mature escorts Manhattan, girl begging for so dirty they're deleting it. Pretty girl with bruised face porn, torture redhead porn, 10-year-old schoolgirl. Some of the stuff is redacted because it's so horrible.
So bad.
They don't even want to show it. So
Yeah.
How does Michael Brown explain these searches on his computer? Oh, this is just the way architects spend their weekends, Architectural Digest. This is part of what they do, Explain that. Tough to explain, right? And that's only one page of it.
Right. Look at all this.
Here we go, Mike, when we talk about consciousness of guilt.
Right.
Why would law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? He's searching this.
Right.
He is the Long Island serial killer, right? He's
right.
If that ain't consciousness of guilt,
Right.
I don't know what is.
Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Long Island serial killer phone call. Long Island
Update.
serial killer update. I mean, look at this stuff. FBI active serial killers. He's got his finger on the pulse of the investigation to try to find out. This is what we call in law enforcement countermeasures.
Right.
He's
Billy,
trying to
look
find out
at
what they're
15,
doing.
16, 16, and 17. He's Googling the names of the victims.
Right.
Yeah.
Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Cops. Here, look at number 20. This is when he must have lost his shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force. That's probably when Rex Heuermann was like, uh-oh.
That may be very well when he tried, like Mike was just saying, when he tried to purchase the software to erase the computer. If there's a correlation between those two things, or
Right.
if it's the day that they released the belt to the public,
Mhm.
and then the next day he's looking for this stuff, there's a correlation. I think that
Right.
could be brought up in court.
Look at number 24.
In Long Island serial killer investigation, new phone technology may be key to break in the
Yeah.
case. Well, these things are all.
But yet he still held on to those burner phones.
Right.
Even with that he's putting in there, he still held them. So that's one of the things that we talk about with the profile of a serial killer.
And folks, what you're seeing on the screen right now, and I would invite everyone and anyone that's a true crime follower and that really enjoys following this case, just Google bail application form Rex Heuermann, Gilgo Beach case.
Comes right up.
And you can have this 32-page document that really explains the case that the state has against Rex Heuermann.
Right.
Because without it, it's very confusing, very convoluted, and tough to, a lot of moving parts. Let's face it, a lot of moving parts to this. And when it can break it down, as this document does, it really helps to understand, I think. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, even as an experienced law enforcement investigator, you read through that thing. I mean, it's not that confusing for me, but I guess for somebody that doesn't know anything about law enforcement, yeah, you got to follow through it and you'll understand. And don't forget, Billy, like you said earlier in the show, this is only a portion of what the evidence is. There's probably 5 or 10 times more that we don't even know about. They were in that house for quite a period of time. We talked about that earlier. I think it was like 8 or 10 days they were in the house. Was it a week? What anybody recall exactly how long they were in the house? Because
It was over a week.
yeah,
Well
it
over
was,
a
It was
week.
over a
Yeah.
week.
yeah, it was an extended period of time. They tore up, if you remember, I think when the lawsuit was filed with regard to the police doing damage to the house, they ripped out a bathtub. They were looking for possible signs if bodies were dismembered, and there was a dismembered body. I think Karen Vergata was dismembered. So they wanted to see if they could find traces of any kind of DNA. That's what I'm thinking. If
Right.
blood is spilled on a porous surface like grout in a tile where it sucks in moisture, perhaps they were looking for DNA of that nature in that area. And it could have been any one of the victims. So there's a lot to be revealed once this trial starts. It's probably going to be a very long trial. I think this is going to be a 2-3 month trial. I mean, based on the stuff we know about it, could be that long. So, I mean, when you're talking about mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA, and then you talk about explaining about the cell phone technology, explaining about serial killers and how they, what the profile is. And then you're going to talk about the crime scene evidence and all the different things that we know about, how they recovered the DNA from the pizza crust and how they recovered DNA from the garbage. All of those things have to be challenged and they're going to be brought out in court.
Absolutely. Roger, still thank you for the $5 super sticker. Only show I hit notifications for. Great show. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
Also,
Thank you.
Gail Salatori, thank you so much for your $5 super sticker. And of course, one of our biggest fans, Schmitty. Schmitty, I'm looking for your name so I can put it up on the screen. Oh, there we go. Schmitty, his lawyer explained it as everyone goes down rabbit holes on the internet. Lame. These searches were sick.
Absolutely, Schmidt.
I 100% agree with you. These searches are not normal. No one normal would make searches like that. Gail Salatori, love you guys. Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your contribution to the show. Lieutenant Peter Pranzo, yeah, I already read that, but I just also want to thank you for your service. Thank you for being
Good
a
man,
supporter of
Lieutenant
the
Pete.
police,
Respect.
of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. Harlem Raiders forever, right? Marianne Knapp, Bitteroff was arrested 7 years ago and is going back to court soon. Bitteroff was another Long Island serial killer that they thought may have been the Gilgo Beach serial killer. However, I think he lawyered up and they couldn't match any of the DNA to him, but I think they got a few cases on him. But look, this case is so complex, and the amount of years that it goes back, and Phil just mentioned Karen Vergata. Karen Vergata went missing in 1997.
Mhm.
Right.
Whether that has anything to do with this case or not, that is confusing. However, all of these cases must be investigated to close this out. And I said, and Phil said with Dr. Joni, we believe that he goes to trial, he gets convicted. Now he's out of the spotlight, right? While the Gilgo Beach Task Force continues to investigate these cases, perhaps they keep a grand jury open. But if he doesn't admit it, these cases are very, very old. Lightning may not strike twice. So what would be the best way to solve some of these cases? To get Rex Heuermann to cooperate. And if he's facing, 500 years in prison, his attorney will say, hey, do whatever you want to do. You're never getting out. Once you cooperate, maybe they'll make your life easier in prison. That's all I can see in that way.
Yeah, Billy, once his appeals are exhausted, of course, there's going to be appeals. And again, he's going to relive the court process, hearing about the victims. He's going to enjoy that. But once all of that happens, if he's convicted, when he's convicted, if the appeals process plays out and it's exhausted, perhaps then, he could cooperate, maybe have a location close to his family that they could visit him or something of that nature. There may be something out there that he wants that he can barter with prosecutors. And I think that there is a component that he's going to want to talk about it because, again, he's going to relive it and talk about it. And he may be looking to say, you know what, I didn't do, all 11. I only did 9 or whatever it is. Or maybe he wants to take credit for all of them. You don't know. He's only charged with 4. There's the other 7
Or
victims.
Phil, he's done some that they don't know about in other
I was
states.
just about to say that. I was just about
You
to say
know,
that.
and that,
you know,
that they have no idea, or the bodies never were turned up.
you-
Buried them
you-
somewhere.
yeah, he
And,
could turn
that
around
would be a changed MO. That would
Yeah,
be a
absolutely.
changed signature. But
and
as we know, serial killers do change.
absolutely. And Billy, you brought it up, that the question that you wanted to ask Dr. Joni Johnston, could it be possible that he did this before? And then did he stop in like 2010 or when the last body was found? What happened between then and 2023 when he's arrested? And it's my feeling and my belief that he knew that the investigation was going based on his searches, but was he able to control the compulsion to kill? That's the question.
Right.
And
Remember,
the picture we have on the screen right now, Shannan Gilbert, and a disheartening case. And people can argue, oh, she was murdered. She was not murdered. The Suffolk County Police believe she drowned in that marsh. She was drunk. Or on drugs. Someone could say she was drunk. She was possibly on some kind of hallucinogen, because you could hear it in the 911 call. She did not sound very lucid. She was fearful of the person that drove her there. A lot of I'm not going to get into that, but Shannan Gilbert was the catalyst that led to the finding of the Gilgo 4, led to finding Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. And if you know where the body of Shannan Gilbert was found, as compared to the Gilgo 4, it's like 3 or 4 miles away. It's not close.
Yeah.
But the catalyst of keeping that, and that, if you want to give John Ray,
I was just going to say that he gets credit for that.
He did keep this case alive. He kept it alive by insisting. And look, we can go back, the corruption part of this, the Burke part of this, the fact that for many years it didn't seem like the detectives out there were doing a hell of a lot with this case. Was that because the victims were sex workers? The victims were escorts? Was their lives not as important as John Q or Jane Q citizen? That's something that we don't have evidence of, but people do have evidence of that. People know what time it was. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Billy, that's one of those questions that is disturbing, because we would like to think that all police departments and law enforcement agencies are excellent and conscientious and always do the right thing. And I think, the people could criticize the NYPD, but we did a lot of things right, given the volume of crime we had to look at. And I remember my last rape case that I ever handled was a prostitute, and she got all the benefit of, as anyone else would have, of whatever services we could give her. And it was just traumatic for her, as it was traumatic for any of the other girls that I had handled previously. So it's a troubling question, and I just hope the answer isn't that they deliberately slow walk the cases. I would rather think it was just incompetence.
Margaret Hearn, Shannan was a pro, and I doubt she would get extremely drunk or high till after client paid. I do believe she was given something to make her disoriented. Margaret, she was definitely on some kind of drug. You could hear it in her voice during the 911 call. She was disoriented. She walked off. And I can't look. The Suffolk County medical examiner did an autopsy, and the pathologist, could not determine cause of death or manner of death. He couldn't declare it a homicide. So John Ray brings in Dr. Michael Bodden, former New York City chief medical examiner, and he basically gives a 2-part conclusion. 1, it was inconclusive, and 2, because the hyoid bone was cracked, I'm ruling it a homicide. So I'm not trying to say this cavalierly, but you cannot be 50% pregnant, it's either one or the other,
That's right.
So I have a little bit of a problem with that. When I heard the Suffolk County police lieutenant who ran this case, the homicide lieutenant, he explained during like a 20 or 25-minute expose on this why they did not believe it was a homicide. And at this point, many, many years later, there is no reason to cover that up. If you could prove that Rex Heuermann had any involvement, which I believe he has no involvement in that case, which then leads us to the point, well, there's other killers then, aren't there? Phil.
Yeah, listen, in the Shannan Gilbert saga, you can hear the extreme paranoia in her voice. She's telling, in that 911 call, she's telling, the operator, somebody's trying to get me. The people, the person who drove her to the location, Mike, he wasn't a stranger to her. And he says, come on, you're freaking me out. And he calls her by her name. And she says, why did you call me by my name? So there's something definitely going on there. Obviously, she goes to the other location. Something happened. She was either, listen, it's possible somebody slipped her something, but she was on some type of a hallucinogenic, like you said, Bill. That's my belief. I don't know if it was alcohol induced or some type of, it caused her to be paranoid. But think about how ironic it is that her case leads to the discovery of these other victims in this case. I think that's pretty ironic. And you got to give Johnny Ray credit that he stood with this case. I believe it was a family member of Shannan Gilbert that contacted him. And, perhaps whatever it was that relative of Shannan Gilbert said to him, it hit home and he stayed with it. Now, he came with these outlandish kind of conspiracy theories as of late, and we really don't believe that there's anything to them. We do believe they could have happened, but we don't think they're connected to this case or the fact that Asa El-Arab is involved in this or anything of that nature. So, but you got to give him credit where credit is due. And we talked about it numerous times, ad nauseum, as Bill always says. What would be the reason that they would exclude Shannan Gilbert from this case? There is no reason. So that's how I feel about that.
Cindy Goddard from the chat. Crucify me all you want, but I believe she had a psychotic break, much like her sister did when she killed their mother. Ran into that marsh and died of exposure. Yeah, Cindy, we crucify no one. You can say what you like and, something will agree with it or that's a possibility. In my opinion, she was drugged in some way because of her behavior. And, everyone wants to believe because of the past corruption in this case that there's still corruption in this case. And I don't believe there is corruption now. I believe a light has been shown upon it. And that's what they always say. You want to get the truth, shine a light on it. And that's what happened. So,
Billy, with that comment, she could be right on track with something. Perhaps she was on medications for her psychotic issues, maybe took a little too much, or she drank, or something else combined with it. Quite possible. Right. And I think nobody's going to crucify anybody that puts up a comment that's respectful or makes sense. It's not ridiculous. So, yeah.
Cindy Goddard, yes, but it was because of her that brought Lisk to light. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, 100%.
We're giving John Ray, but I think a lot of the new information when it comes out, and we mentioned the press conference, of course, that John Ray had recently, where we spoke about a witness from 27 years ago that was with some NYPD narcotics detective and a woman that was Karen Vergara, like it was just like, oh, really? It's almost like someone wrote that script before the show, and I don't buy that. Mike.
Billy, I don't buy it either. I think the applicants are probably good, well-intentioned. I think John Ray is well-intentioned. He did keep this case alive, and I think that has to be acknowledged, and we've acknowledged it. But I think that some of the people who may have, spoken to him and said, this got to be Karen Bragad. It's got to be Asa El-Arab. Yeah. It was 27 years ago. It was dark. We were drinking. We went to Long Island. Oh, that's the house. They mean well. I'm not going to, give them ulterior motives, but just because you say something, you believe something to be true, doesn't mean it factually is true.
Mike, Lou Lemoracco has a question for you.
Hey, Lou.
We haven't seen him in a while. Good to see you, Lou. Professor Mike, please explain the Sophie's choice Shannan made that night. Thanks.
Oh, Shannan Gilbert running into the marsh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she had a choice. It's a no-win. It's a Hobson's choice. Well, it's either run away when you're high and you don't know where you are and you're going to be in the dark and getting away from something, or submit to some sort of activity that obviously something freaked her out. It could have been the narcotic, it could have been alcohol, but something freaked her out in that house that she was driven to by that guy named Mike in the big Suburban. And so she had a choice to make: submit to some sort of, maybe it was an orgy she didn't want to get into, some sort of activity she didn't want to get into, or run away. And she had to make a choice. Neither one was good. Neither one was going to guarantee that she was going to come out of it alive. Neither one of them was going to, may have been a mortal choice where it would have been over. But she made a choice and she took one path, and it, unfortunately, time, date, location, weather, medical issues, alcohol. She actually ran, unfortunately, after running to two different houses, ran away into marsh, not even down a block, actually ran into marsh.
Think about that at night. I mean, anybody could get disoriented and fall down,
Yeah, but
high or not, or,
right.
psychotic or not.
Yeah, she didn't stick around for anyone to help her.
Urban infidel. She knew she was in trouble. They used her real name, and she mentioned she wouldn't tell anyone and wouldn't say anything. She knew something and was unalived, in my humble opinion. William Grant. I would like to hear from the officers who responded to our call that night. Any relation or background with Burke? William Grant, the problem was they didn't respond till the next day. They couldn't determine where the phone call came from. This was pre-GPS tracking of your phone. So there was a confluence of errors.
She even said in the call, she said, can't you tell where I am by the phone? And the operator said, no. Can you tell where I am by my number? So
was Shannan found in the 3 miles before the other victims or 3 miles after? She was found 3 miles east of the other victims.
Billy, can I respond to a comment in the chat? It's Donna Douglas, and she says, I don't think an Emmy would lie about Shannan cause of death. We're not saying that anybody lied. It's just that the first medical examiner said that the cause of death was undetermined, meaning they couldn't find the cause of death. Now, Dr. Bodden, who later did the second autopsy, said he agrees with the Suffolk County medical examiner that the cause of death is undetermined. However, he did feel that there might have been a fracture in the hyoid bone, which is a bone in the neck, and therefore he felt it could have been a homicide. So we're not saying that anyone lied. It just seems very unlikely based on the other facts that we know. I mean, that hyoid bone, that body was out there for a long period of time, could have gotten fractured in many other ways. It could have even frozen and broke, or animal interaction. Someone could have stepped on it and not even knowing they were stepping on a human body going through there. So there's a lot of different things that could have happened with that, but there's many other factors that they took into consideration. The interviews of the people she was with, the interview of the neighbor next door, and the fact that she was on the phone for, I think it was like 12 minutes or something like that, talking to a 911 operator. And she said she was calling the police. So if someone is going to be murdered and they get on the phone, you're not going to let them stay on the phone with the police. So all of those factors is why we believe it wasn't a homicide, not related to this particular case. No one said that Dr. Bodden lied or the other medical examiner lied.
Roger Still, do sex workers generally call the police for help? Yes.
Of course.
Prostitutes, sex workers are usually excellent complainants. When they're wronged, they will call the police and they will cooperate and they will go to court. The happy melancholist. You do know Shannan had Rex as a client about a year before that night and was at a hotel. That's not confirmed. That's another Johnny Ray story. Totally unconfirmed.
That's somebody reported it and they signed an affidavit to it.
That's another affidavit, and we don't know if that was vetted by the Suffolk County detectives. So that another story
has not been corroborated.
Right, can muddy up the waters. But thank you for making us aware that we are aware of it, but it has not been cooperated, that information. So we can't go with it as it's the truth. Marsha Braga, he might have been the one to drug her, and that's why she knew something was wrong. Look, they know the John she went to see. He had been interviewed extensively. They know the house she went to after that. They know this creepy doctor that lived in that community there. He was interviewed extensively. He was like a huge suspect for a while.
Right.
So they had years actually to vet this stuff. Johnny Ray took depositions from all the people there. How could they still be hiding something? And again, when you think about it, how was Rex Heuermann even remotely involved in this? He's not. He's not.
It's completely out of the profile that he has presented with these other sex workers. He had like a kind of a pattern, and that's complete, going to a hotel, that's completely out of his wheelhouse of what he did. So that part of it is one thing. And, we know that, there's no corroboration to it. It's just, listen, that incident probably did happen. That affiant that signed that affidavit, it probably did happen to that person. However, is it Rex Heuermann? We don't believe so.
Yeah, I mean, look, some things as time goes by, it's very difficult to put the puzzle together and get the exact truth. And maybe you can never get the exact truth once the time has transpired and witnesses move on and people's memories of things have changed. It's not always easy to get the truth after the amount of time that has transpired has transpired. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, I think that's part of the frustration here is that we know he's been accused of committing these 4 heinous crimes, and a lot of it has to do with the MO, location where the body was found, how they were wrapped and preserved in one particular area, and the other 7, unfortunately, too much maybe too much time has passed, and we'll never know how these people came to be dead, whether or not it was Rex Heuermann or someone else. And I think people have to be prepared to live with that. That, as you said before, there may be people in other states that we don't know that he may have killed, or these people, and we just can't prove it. And so, time and nature take hold of the bodies and people's memories, and they fade very quickly. And I think we just need to, people in the real crime community just need to just say, we may never have an answer for all of these other homicides.
The other 7 bodies,
right?
What are the chances that they're going to be able to connect them to Rex Heuermann? Yeah. Very difficult. May have he committed some of them? Absolutely. I think the chances are very good that he did. But minus him cooperating post perhaps being found guilty after trial, they may not have any physical evidence, DNA evidence. They may have nothing to tie him into those. So will they forever remain open? Phil?
Well, what I'm very interested to find out is, and probably Rodney Harrison would have the answer to this, what was the positioning of the bodies? How were the bodies found? Were they bound? Was there some type of a covering over them? Were they consistent with the way that he left the Gilgo for? We know that from earlier in the show when Dr. Joni talked about it, she said there was a slight change. The belt might have been something that was done out of haste, but perhaps the burlap bags were part of a pattern. So with the fact that those bodies were out there for a long time, maybe there's no DNA evidence on the bodies, but how were the bodies found? What do we believe was the possible cause of death? Was there ligature? Was there bonding? So I think that they're going to be able to have a good opinion on whether or not he's involved in those cases based on just the crime scene. There may be other stuff too. Don't forget those victims had families. Those victims may have had cell phones. There could be some traces of that that could have, maybe popped up in Manhattan or Massapequa that, it could make the investigators believe, all right, he's responsible for this one, but there may be some very, very vast changes in the way the bodies were found. Not all of them. Maybe one, it was, vastly different from the others, or two, so those are the things that, being on the inside of the case, having the case folder would give you a better idea of whether or not he's involved in those cases. I don't know. I kind of get the feeling from the press conferences that they do believe he's involved in those murders, and it doesn't seem like they're concerned about maybe there's another killer. So if I had a bet, I'd say about 75% chance. I'd bet that he's involved in all of those murders.
I don't think not all, some. It's Shannan Gilbert. I don't think he had anything to do with it.
No, I'm talking about the other 7
Oh,
bodies.
the 7 bodies. Yeah.
No, Shannan Gilbert, I really am. I'm 100% that I don't think he's involved in that.
Right. TJ, what if the affidavit is true, though? I believe you're referring to the affidavit signed by the person that Johnny Ray held the press conference about. I believe that's what you're speaking about. There were at least 3 things in that affidavit that can be vetted. One was the New York City narcotics detective. Who is he? Let's get him in. Let's interview him. Does he have the same exact recollection as the unnamed affiant in this case? Does he have the same recollection? If he doesn't, then maybe this is not true. Number 2, the woman who allegedly was Karen Vergata, looked like Karen Vergata, and this was 27 years ago, according to the affiant, had just been arrested, and they picked her up in New York City. They could verify that. Was Karen Vergata arrested 27 years ago in New York City? I don't know if the affiant knew the charges. Was it for anything prostitution related, or what was it for? And then bringing them out to Long Island, to Massapequa Park. Asa Ellerup cannot be interviewed any longer because she's got counsel. She's got an attorney. So they can't vet any of that information with her. But there's several things about the affidavit that can be checked. Obviously, the affiant can be interviewed at great length by the Suffolk County detectives. And if they don't find her statement to be true, that's the end of it.
Whether or not it's true, is really, I don't think somebody would make up the story and lie and come forward in such a manner. It's possible, but what I think it is these things happen to these people. However, they're trying to connect it to Rex Heuermann based on the big media attention to the case. And, listen, maybe it was a big individual that this person had the interaction with at the hotel that they described. But I doubt very highly. And like you just brought out all the points, Billy, these things could be vetted, whether or not it was Rex Heuermann.
Absolutely. Lou, we actually need to just revisit the whole. I don't have independent recollection about everything in the Shannan Gilbert case, and it's very involved also. But here's one: who's standing next to Gus Coletti on the 9/11 call? You heard the tape. Many clues on tape not mentioned. Yes, there's a lot of things, Lou, but the Suffolk County Police, and for that matter, John Ray, reinvestigated that whole thing. John Ray took statements from everyone involved in that. And just recently, in the past 6 months. So I think that is more or less put to sleep. They're never going to be able to do another autopsy. They're never going to be able to rule manner and cause of death. So it's like there's a thing on the police department we used to call a cuppy. Circumstances undetermined pending police investigation. And even after the investigation, they still cannot determine 100% what occurred. Guys, we're at 1 hour and 22 minutes. I think this show, I almost wish I was watching it. I think it was.
Do you want to do Joe Murray?
Oh, yeah, we should do the Joe Murray commercial. We forgot to do it the other night, so we owe him one tonight.
Joe Murray, attorney at law. Now, he's up on the screen there, folks. If you happen to be in need of a criminal defense attorney in the New York City area, Joe Murray is your man. He's not only an experienced criminal defense attorney, he's also a 15-year member of the NYPD. So he literally knows both sides of the fence. You could see up on the screen, his website is jmurray-law.com. You can telephone him at 646-838-1702, or you can email Joe at joe@jmurray-law.com. Joe's a big supporter of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, and we think that he is a super criminal defense attorney.
Excellent job. Guys, I'm going to go around once, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight. I know this case has been getting a lot of coverage, a lot of new information, and I think it's still super, super interesting. And I think when it's brought to you by subject matter experts such as Professor Mike Geary, Detective Phil Grimaldi, and of course, a big treat tonight to have forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston, to me was worth the price of admission, as they say. Professor Mike.
Bill, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. And I'm just really happy that they got to hear Dr. Joni Johnston, who is so steeped in knowledge about serial killers, and I hope they enjoyed the show.
You know, I love having her on the show. She's such a pleasure also to deal with. Detective Phil.
Absolutely, Billy. I echo those words. The minute that I heard she was coming on, I was delighted. She is a wealth of information with regard to serial killers, and she's an all-around just real nice person. Thank you so much, Dr. Joni Johnston, for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it. Listen, guys, this case is very, very interesting. A lot of moving parts to it. I'm glad we got a lot of people in the chat tonight. Of course, without the people in the chat, without the subscribers, without the fans, there would be no Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. So I say thank you to you people. Keep the great comments coming. There was a lot of good stuff in there tonight. And let's just get justice for these victims: Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes, as well as any of the other victims that were found out in that area of Gilgo Beach, Long Island.
Folks, I guess these guys said it all. You don't need me to close with any further words, but thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Take care, everyone, and stay safe.
One episode